There we go. Okay, so welcome to our virtual roundtable on board recruitment and retention. I'm Eileen Corcoran with the Vermont Historical Society. A couple of quick notes for Zooming and such. I'm going to right now turn on the live transcript option from Zoom, that it is an AI transcript for folks who might be needing closed captioning. So it may not be 100% correct, but hopefully will be helpful. If you don't know, if you see it on the bottom and you don't want to see it, you can hide subtitles by clicking on the options at the bottom of your screen, generally under perhaps the More button. As usual, this is a virtual roundtable, so we do hope to have lots of great discussion and talking. So definitely, we appreciate if folks are not planning to speak, that you do keep yourself on mute until you do want to speak. If you want to, you can feel free to either raise your hand or kind of shout out politely. You can also certainly put any information or share anything that you'd like to in the chat for folks to see. And that's especially great if you want to share links or resources that you think would be wonderful to share with people. And I think that's kind of my business end. So I'm going to start by turning it over to our guest today, Dan Yeager from the New England Museum Association. So we're going to welcome him, and he's going to talk a little bit about board recruitment and retention for us. Dan.
Well, thank you, Eileen. Appreciate it. Hello, everybody. How are you? I know a couple of you on the call here. I see Barbara from Brattleboro. I don't see your picture, but I know you. I met you a few times. Margaret, how are you? Good to see one of my bosses. Margaret is a new board member of NEMA from the Fleming Museum, so great to see you. Anyway, glad to be. Oh, there you are, Barbara. How are you?
I turned off my video because I was having my lunch.
Yeah, there you go. So we don't want crumbs everywhere, right? So I'm going to give you just a little bit of my impressions of what's going on in our museum community overall over the last couple of years, and see if that sort of is not necessarily regarding board retention and recruitment and so forth, but just sort of general observations. And then we can go into a little bit more of a, just a discussion of what the issues are that you're looking at having some thoughts on, and, kind of roundtable some of these ideas of where we are as organizations, with board service and the like. Just a quick check here, though, if you would, show of hands or otherwise, you can use your virtual hands. You're all, I assume, board members, and I don't know, I don't want to assume that, but board members, and are you, how many of you, let me ask the question, raise your hand, how many of you are board members right now? So that's okay, that's good. And your organizations, let me just see this, are you all volunteer organizations? How many of y'all are all volunteer? Okay. So most of you do. So it's not necessarily that you have staff and whatever. Okay, that's good. Good to know. So you're in that wonderful category of working boards and doing the work and governance at the same time. So that's good. Okay, so just a couple of observations. I don't know how many of you all know NEMA, but we are the New England Museum Association. We work with museums in all 6 of the New England states and beyond. We have members, elsewhere as well. We've been around for 102 years, I think, roughly. So we've been around for quite a while, and we try to serve as broad a swath of the museum community as possible in our region. We say that, we represent museums A to Z, from art museums to zoos, which, it's a kind of a, an interesting task, because we've got a ton of different kinds of folks that belong to our association. Just a fun fact, you may not know this, but we have the highest per capita concentration of museums anywhere in the United States, here in New England. About double the number of people per, museums per capita anywhere else in the United States, which is good. And a fun fact, Vermont is, I think, maybe 1 or 2, if I'm not mistaken, in terms of per capita number of museums in your state compared to the rest of the United States. So we obviously have a lot of folks that are, clearly you're very much part of your communities and very important. And I guess just the other thing, just in terms of NEMA, our membership represents about 50%, 53%, I think, are history organizations, 25% are art organizations, and all the rest, children's museums and science centers and the like kind of fall into the other category. And that pretty much mirrors the general population of museums out there. But historical societies, historical museums are clearly the largest in terms of the number of folks that participate in our organization, but elsewhere as well. So, the last couple of years have been very disruptive for our field generally, a lot of upheavals. Obviously, public health being, sort of the most obvious one with COVID, we've become very attuned to, sort of organizing ourselves around what do our visitors and our constituencies need in order to basically feel safe dealing with our organizations. And of course, those, the first several months of 2020 into even 2021, many of us were closed and dealing just virtually with people. We all became Zoom experts over the last, bunch of months. And so that has become, sort of our standard operating procedure, but it's going to continue to affect the way we do business as organizations for really the foreseeable future, as we've been hearing the phrase moving from pandemic to endemic. It's just going to be baked into what we do, having some measure of sensitivity to, our operations catering to people's perception of, are they going to be safe in our institutions when they come to visit us and so forth. So that's going to be a major consideration for some time to come. The shifting to virtual programs, has been another trend because of COVID. We've become very expert in not just using Zoom for meetings, but also engaging with our audiences, as we're doing today, having conversations with folks, but the having online lectures, having online fundraisers, even those kinds of things, that's become standard course. That is morphing now as many of us are opening physically to folks, but we're finding that hybrid expectation now is going to continue. The idea that we have an in-person event, exhibition, lecture, or whatever, but it's also available via Zoom or whatever platform, that is there. And a lot of museums are needing to deal with that. It's an opportunity and a curse, because how do we do both at the same time? But we also don't want to lose the audiences that we actually captured through the virtual platform, because people were attending our lectures and so forth from all over the place, as opposed to just the local area. And so that's something that we're kind of wrestling with. How do we actually accommodate both of those? Just as a footnote, NEMA, the NEMA conference, as you may or may not know, has been a virtual conference the last 2 years. This coming year, we're going to have our first in-person conference since we were up in Burlington in 2019. But we're also doing a virtual component as well. So we're effectively going to be running 2 conferences this year, an in-person and a virtual, which really, has a profound impact on our staff capabilities and the like. A third thing that we've been worried about, all of us museums in general, have been finances, needless to say, and there have been concerns and opportunities there as well. Especially as we were entering the pandemic, what's going to happen to us when nobody's visiting and they're not paying our, admission fees and so forth. And that really was impacted quite a bit. However, the 2 saving graces that most museums found is that the folks that were the community of funders and their community of donors really did, in fact, step up for the most part and help fund their operations, and in some ways, and in some cases, more than they had anticipated at all. And so that, plus the fact that the stock market remained fairly robust, and whatever investments anybody had continued to grow, really did help museums generally weather the storm. Those museums that had employees were also benefited by those federal programs like the PPP and the like that underwrote the payroll, at least in the first year of the pandemic. So that was really a saving grace. The question is how, are museums with employees going to weather the storm this coming year, or this year, when PPP was not available, and in the future as well. It's still a bit of an open question. Social justice was another thing that popped up onto our radar screen, and I say popped up advisedly. The George Floyd murder really created a moment where folks in general, museums, were really put to task with stepping up their game in terms of diversity, equity, access, and inclusion. And so a number of folks have really focused on what our museum practices are and what we expected to do, both by our communities and our employees and our funders and the like. So these are issues that are being tackled at the museum level. We are tackling those issues at the as NEMA as well. We're currently undergoing a year-long plus social justice and diversity training that is going to really change the way we do business. So a lot of museums are experiencing that. Climate is another one that we've been tasked with. Generally, museums are starting to recognize the potential of some existential and catastrophic aspects of what's happening with climate change. And that's not just museums that are located in coastal areas where we're seeing sea level rise and the like, but the advance of a lot more rainfall, really difficult events, that are sort of swinging weather trends and the like are affecting historic houses, obviously, with their facilities. And so these are going to be things that I think museums are going to increasingly be focusing on over the course of time. And I guess, one other thing that I'd like to point out that I've noticed in talking with people is that, even though this has been a very challenging 18 months to 2 years, depending on how you measure it, there's also been this really terrific, I think, outpouring of community engagement in general with museums, that they've become seen in their communities as much more of a value. I think people in some ways have taken for granted their local museums. They're just always there, and they're kind of in the background perhaps to some folks. And the idea that the pandemic has potentially threatened many of their local institutions has made, I think, community members really start appreciating the fact that we are necessary elements of the quality of life in our communities. We need funding and support and the like. And so, as I mentioned, the folks in the communities have stepped up with memberships and donations and the like. The museums themselves have found ways to engage their communities in a non-traditional manner, which has really been helpful as well. I think finding ways to serve, such as just being testing sites and vaccination sites later. A number of museums have done food distribution, food bank kinds of things in their communities. Whatever's necessary that has helped their community weather the storm. Opening up their outdoor spaces has been another one. Where they couldn't go into, say, the historic houses and the like. But the whatever grounds that they have for dog walking or for outdoor types of activities and events, yoga and the like, that's been something that I think has been a real plus. The communities have really engaged with their museums, I think, in a different way and maybe in a much more positive way. And hopefully that's something that we can continue to capitalize on. Anyway, so those are just sort of general observations of what's happening in the museum field right now. Sort of a difficult time, but we've risen to a lot of challenges. And so I guess I'd love to have a little chat with you guys then about what your experiences have been, and then of course to the topic about board retention and recruitment, particular questions that in this environment, facing whatever challenges you might have and concerns you might have, I'd be happy to answer those questions and try to figure out some answers collectively. don't make me call on anybody. I'm going to pick on you, Margaret, being a board member of NEMA. You might have some conversations, questions.
Well, I wouldn't mind speaking a little bit about the issues that we have in Dummerston, Vermont. I've noticed in the paper and in various other museum newsletters and things that I'm not the only one, is, trying to find and recruit new members, both to just help out with the work, and also to maybe our board is, as I'm guessing this is universal, our board is getting older, strangely. And and so that, we have several of us are octogenarians, and we need help often with technology and that kind of thing. So I don't know if you could just speak to that general issue. I think it's probably prevalent.
Oh, absolutely. I mean, this is, I have sort of this joke about, when I talk to historical societies in particular, that there just seems to be this magical thing that happens when people turn 65, is all of a sudden they become interested in their own genealogy, and all of a sudden they say, I think I'm going to go work at the Historical Society. It's like, and prior to that, I don't know, it's like folks are perhaps too busy with their careers and families, and I don't know what. I mean, it is a bit of a joke, but we all know that, working generally board service at historical societies is has been traditionally for folks of retirement age because of both interest and time availability and the like. I think that, you're right, Muriel, in pointing out that technological demands are changing, and there are a number of things that, actually there are generational issues that are at play that I think we really do need to watch. First of all, one of the things that we know societally is that people are joining things and committing themselves less than they ever used to in certain ways. And that is certainly true, more true of younger generations. What we're finding, and I don't know, if that includes the trailing edge of the boomer generation, which is me, or Gen X or whatever, but we're finding that, the way people participate is a little bit different than it was before. So, that's of course a particular concern for organizations like ours, NEMA, as a membership organization. What does it mean to be a member of something? In the same way, with board service, I think generally, what we're finding is that people tend to plug in much more on a task-related basis in some ways, that they are happy to serve on, say, a committee to, do X, Y, Z, whether it's an event or a fundraiser or something like that, rather than necessarily committing themselves to the more open-ended, I'm going to be a board member, which, seems to have a lot more, responsibilities, obviously, from a legal standpoint and from, an organizational standpoint, but also just from the time commitment standpoint. I think some of that has to do with just, the way we've structured our own sense of personal time and personal space and whatever. I don't know what the answers are to that, but I do recommend to folks, I think you need to be much more open to doing business in ways that are a little different than before. So the idea of having, board service be the only way you engage with your organization, and having, I don't know how many people are on any of your boards, but I know that, boards typically are in the, depending on the community, I've heard some boards are like 45 people. I don't know how you get any work done, but, it's like, it's almost like that's been the requirement to hold people. And I don't think that that's necessarily going to play out anymore. I think that you got to find some ways to be able to accommodate ways that you can engage people in what you do that aren't necessarily taking on the complete responsibility that goes with being a board member. So you might shrink the number of actual board members you have, but have more opportunities for people to kind of plug and play, so to speak, into different activities. And, that certainly is what we're seeing as being a possibility. And that then also certainly is the case if you're trying to attract young people, yeah, your younger people, to however you define that.
I wonder if anyone else here has had specific luck with that. We are aware that that is truly the case. And we've put it in our local newspapers and things. We're not getting any response. So maybe we're listing too many things. Has anybody else had any success with finding a person to do a particular job?
George, it looks like you have your hand up. Oh, still muted.
Bet you can hear me better now. Montpelier Historical Society, the society became dormant about 2011. And just 6 months ago, a few of us got together and decided maybe it ought to become reactivated, and we did. So we just had our third monthly meeting recently. So we had to recruit 12 new board members from scratch. And actually, it was very easy. We had a couple public meetings. We announced them in a couple different ways. And from seeing the people at those meetings and people knowing people, we just recruited. And actually, to get 12 board members, we only had to ask 14 people. 2 people deferred, but 12 agreed. And it's an excellent list of local people. Now, let me go off on a tangent a little bit. And older people like us often have no use for Facebook. But let me say that those of you who don't know about this, there's some tremendous historical Facebook sites available today. Burlington has 2, Montpelier has 2, St. Johnsbury, Danville, Barry, Berlin, and those are just the ones that I belong to and know about. The Burlington Facebook sites have 15,000 members. The 2 Montpelier sites have 3,000 members. And that's 3,000 people that are interested in Montpelier history. And this has gone a long ways towards increasing interest among many people. And sure, they're all probably average 65 or 70, but there's a lot of young people and we know a lot of these names. So it's a tremendous source. So if you want members, it's hard to kind of advertise for them. I think you have to go out and ask them. And if you look at a Facebook site, and these Facebook sites will tell you every member. So you can look at your local area and see, open up that site and you'll get 15,000 potential board members from Burlington if you wanted to. So anyway, that's just kind of the end of my story, and for whatever it's worth. Thank you.
Thanks, George. That's a keys an idea for me as well, that something that we've been trying to encourage, and that is museums, historical societies, and the like, actually recruiting board members that are from the museum community. And by that, I mean, I do know that there are a couple of instances that I know personally of younger museum professionals that work in a museum, but then they also serve on museum, like historical society boards. And I think there's a lot of, I think they were recruited perhaps through Facebook. I know that, we are trying to create, a platform for that type of thing, where if you want to recruit younger people, take a look at some of the museum professionals that, they're naturally interested in, say, history or whatever. And surprisingly, they have, their day jobs, but they also really love to participate in their local historical society as well. So that's a possibility. Social media driven, to George's point, for sure.
So again, I think that refrain of we're, it's an older generation, the younger folks don't want to come. And again, this generational shift in service. I'm curious if anyone out there has done anything as it relates to looking at the volunteer demographics of their community. So, we talk about meeting younger people. Do you know, have you talked with other organizations in your community to see who they get volunteers, like who are the actual people who can volunteer in your community. Has anybody sort of looked at that and found out? I think these, again, the unicorns of the young people, like, do they even exist in your community? And do you know for sure who those people are that could volunteer?
Well, and all right, I'll append another question to the question, and that is, why is it important? I mean, why? So, you know, the idea that, oh, we need to have younger people involved, you know, that my sort of joking observation at the beginning of like, you don't really get anybody until they're 65 years old anyway. So what's wrong with that? You know, and I'm saying it sort of hypothetically because, you know, what is it exactly that you would want a younger person to do with what it is that, you know, you are doing? So, you know, for example, if there is a technological thing and, you know, folks that are clearly not up to date, say with technology, is that only the purview of a younger person that could do that? Or is that some, you know, is that problem to be solved somewhere else? Not that we don't love younger people, right? But, you know, it's the idea that why are you desirous of that? And I hear it a lot. Oh, we need to get more younger people involved. It's really like we're more concerned that we're aging out and we need somebody to replace us. And maybe it's not so much a 30-year-old, 25-year-old, 30-year-old. It's just that we need to have a regular pipeline to those 65-year-olds that are going to replace, you know, us as we are aging out. And so I'm just raising the question from your organizational strategic perspective, you know, what is it exactly that you know, your needs in fact are at any given time? Because you might be barking up the wrong tree in your community, even trying to get, you know, somebody that is just not going to be particularly disposed to belong or participate in your organization. All right, thoughts, Tess?
Yes.
Yeah, you know, I think, you know, you're talking about younger, but younger that's a pretty big span if we're talking about most people being over 65. Younger could be 55.
Right.
But I think the desire is that fresh perspective, not so much, you know, does anybody, because I know a lot of seniors who are really adept at technology. I mean, it's kind of a fallacy. Like I've always said, you know, grandparents figured out how to see their grandchildren on iPads. They can do anything. So, but I think it's about that fresh perspective and, you know, trying to figure out what's interesting to the community, because it's not just about having board members to do technology. It's about keeping your community's interest up in what is happening. You know, your history is the things that people are changing. I mean, you know, you see a lot of history now really reflecting, you know, diversity and, you know, things that happened in our communities. And it's not about this object that we have, it's actually about, you know, much more. So I think for me, that's it. I mean, very historical society is also stewards of the of a national historic site, you know, the Labor Hall. So there's a dual purpose there here too. And so that's what I throw out there. It's not just we want to tick off a box saying that we've got people under 40. It's what is this community interested in as we move along.
George.
I'm reminded of the fact that one of our main philosophies is you don't have to be a director to be a volunteer. Now, nobody said you did. And of course, any of you would agree with that as being pretty basic, but you really kind of want to work at that. And I've been a part of a county fair for years, and the person in charge of horse pulling is not a director, because that person is really good at horse pulling, but has no interest in going to monthly meetings. So if you want some exhibits done by your historical society, you don't need a director. You just need somebody that happens to know about that local manufacturing facility and has some old pieces from it and is willing to ask somebody to put it in a store window, and they don't have to be a director. But yes, we still need a volunteer, but volunteers and directors can definitely be two different things.
The idea that so the thought of young people, like, we don't have them now, and we need to, whatever that means, and we need to get them. It's really try to flip it around the other way, and it strikes me that, does that mean that history is only for old people? Does that mean that if we're a historical society, it's like only older people really get into history? And that's not the case, and we all know that. The thing is like, whatever your museum is it a children's museum, so to speak? Is it a family place? Is it a place where people feel comfortable going as just like your community hangout space? Is it like, what is it that we are doing in the community that is of interest to folks that are everybody? Literally, how do we position ourselves, and not just sort of the stereotypical dusty old history place that only a small number of people are interested in? And the places that I've found that have been really thriving parts of their community really do reach out to literally everybody and figure out a way to make themselves the community museum of sorts. And as I mentioned in my opening thoughts about the outdoor spaces have been a way to really engage the community in a way that, okay, I'm not interested in going into a historic house. I'm not into that, say, but I am interested in walking my dog in this beautiful place, or taking a hike in the pathways that are, or enjoying the gardens, or whatever it is that you've got. That's a really interesting point of entry for folks. And I think that notion of the point of the entry points of what it is that you do and how broad can we make that really does then strengthen your relationship with the community. And so therefore then some of the things that you do that you need, you expand the ability to ask people to participate, whether it's on a board or on a particular task or whatever. And so families that might love to bring their kids on a walk through your gardens or your woods or whatever it is, those people might be interested in helping maintain the trails or maintain the gardens or whatever that you wouldn't ordinarily think of. And that's, I guess, a little bit of that creativity that goes into understanding your community and what is it that we actually serve. So it's not just a historical building or something that maybe somebody that's not particularly interested in history isn't going to really be into that, but you've got like way more than that, spaces in the community. So I see, a virtual hand. Kim. Is it Kim?
Oh, hi, this is Karen, actually.
Karen.
Karen from
Okay.
SD Oregon Museum.
Hey.
It was interesting what Eileen said, looking at the demographics of the volunteer community. But it made me think about looking at the demographics of who comes to your museum. And, if I think about it, I think, we're the SD Oregon Museum, we probably just get people who are interested in the Victorian era, perhaps people who are just interested in the history of Brattleboro. But we get a lot of other kinds of folks who come in. We get folks who are, for instance, young musicians who come and, play either keyboard or organ or piano, and they just want to come in and see what is a reed organ like. So, I'm thinking about what are the different groups of people and why do they come to the museum? And that almost is a springboard as to looking for volunteers.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, this is rather naive. I guess I should have thought of this before, but Eileen, I'm taking off from your idea. So thank you.
Well, it's a terrific point, the non-traditional visitor. And I say non-traditional, just because you're a historical society, say, or a history-related museum, doesn't mean that everybody, you only reach out to people that are history lovers. There are certain elements of what it is that you do. I mean, the Oregon Museum is a great case in point of, there's a technology there. So people that are interested in technology, like, what is your collaboration with the Precision Museum, say, in where's that, Windsor, right? Because I know that people really love technology. They go to that museum and they go to potentially yours and whatever. So it's like, okay, technology, we can talk to them about that. The music, as you mentioned, is an obvious one as well. How about just people that are into, I mean, does everybody know what steampunk is? This is like a thing, you know, that has grown over the course of time. People that are into sort of the combination of science fiction and Victorian aesthetics, right? And they love, you know, the mechanics of certain things, and they love the you know, sort of this blend. They're an interesting group of people, you know, but, you know, do they tour around, you know, those kinds of things? And is your, you know, is that a potential draw? What was the other thing I was thinking? Oh, yeah, well, I'm currently reading a book by a guy named Archer Mayer. You know him? He's right, the Vermont whodunit guy. I love his books, and you know, there are these, you know, tours, people that really are into literary things. What are your literary connections? I know like Brattleboro, not Brattleboro, Bennington, right, has the Robert Frost grave above the Bennington Museum, and a whole bunch of people do pilgrimages to go see the Robert Frost grave and then go visit the museum, you know, those kinds of things. So, you know, what are those tie-ins? And, you know, it's really, it's kind of fun to be creative if you sit down with your group of folks and start thinking about what are the non-traditional audiences that might be interested in participating, that, you know, come from afar, but also, you know, it might be your local community as well.
Thinking about board members. Oh, sorry, did you want to speak, Sue?
Go ahead.
Something that's really worked out for the Brattleboro Historical Society is that we got 2 history teachers on our board. And one is a middle school history teacher, the other's a high school history teacher. One of them ended up doing Facebook and podcasts and newspaper stuff with the students. And especially those middle school students, they really took to it. And so I would recommend to any board that you have high school or middle school teacher on your board, because they just offer so much and can connect with the younger people who turn out to really, really appreciate doing research, all sorts of amazing things that they're doing.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
The Tunbridge Historical Society's been really inactive now for, well, I'm guessing around 5-6 years after the Farnhams both were not well, and now Euclid has passed on. We have a young history teacher who lives in Tunbridge, and he would be here today, except it was during the school day, so he couldn't, but I'll tell him that it is being recorded. My question is very basic. How many people do you recommend for a board? A half a dozen? I mean, you got to remember, we're in a really small community. We don't have cities. I live in Royalton. We haven't had a historical society active since I've been here. Thanks to John Dumville, we do have a small museum. But the Tunbridge Historical Society really wants to get going, and the young teacher has been pushing to get more people involved in the Historical Society. They do not have a physical museum. The Museum of Tunbridge is at the Tunbridge Fair and up on Antique Hill, where I work. So it's a mixed bag. And my other question about board members, if you can get a half a dozen or a dozen, I would presume an odd number might be better than an even. I don't know that. And how do you suggest that we have term limits on these boards?
These are all
So those are very basic
questions.
questions that I'm just kind of putting out there, because it's been running around in my own head. So.
Well, I'm glad you raised it, Sue. So first of all, my observation is that there is absolutely no one size fits all. It depends on your own situation and, you know, what feels the best. There are, you know, and I'm learning that the best practices really don't exist either, because you can say, well, these are what most places do, but it doesn't really apply to us. So first of all, in most states, and I don't know what it's like in Vermont, but there are very minimal requirements for what you actually need as a nonprofit organization to operate. Typically, it's only, you basically need maybe one person that's technically on the board. That's the clerk, so that they interface with the government somehow, you know, doing the reports. But other than that, you know, it's like, it's very minimal, and you build out from that. So, you know, as I said, some places have 45, I mean, actual board members, and I think that's crazy. You know, I don't know how you get anything done, but other places find themselves operating very fine with, you know, 3-4 people as technically board members, because they're the ones that are in charge of, you know, the actual organization and filing documents and making sure everything's, you know, going the way they need to. And then they have a whole bunch of volunteers that kind of come in and out and do what needs to get done, and, you know, whatever works. Term limits, again, you know, they'll tell you best practices are, yeah, you got to have term limits. Everybody's got to have a 3-year term, and then they're out of here to keep things fresh. But the honest to God truth is that in most cases, you don't have that many people to pull from. You just you just stay on the board, and it works. You know, I mean, there's just, I can't say this enough. It's like whatever works for your particular situation, and don't stress too much over it. You know, as long as you are, whoever's on the board, are operating more or less harmoniously, and you can get along and you have fun doing it, you know, then that's what this is all about. And not to get too tied up in knots about, you know, needing to have certain quorums and, you know, procedures and so on and so forth. You know, so yeah, I mean, technically, you know, if you've got an even number of people, then votes can wind up being tied if you're voting. But, you know, a lot of folks don't even do a lot of formal voting, because you're just like a couple of people that are sitting around a table and trying to make a decision. So it's less of a, you know, a process that's formal, and more of just conversations that get things going. But, you know, as you get bigger and you get more responsibility and you've got more, say, operations, then you do need to formalize things a little bit more. But again, the message is, it's what works for you, you know, I think is the big thing. And don't stress out over it too much. Focus on what you're trying to do as your mission and serving people, as opposed to worrying about the clubhouse, so to speak, of, you know, what your members are all about, and, you know, that type of a thing. Tess?
Yeah. Hi, Sue. Long time no see. You know, I was thinking, in particularly in Tunbridge's case, and then it could be in some other cases. You know, Sue, you come from Randolph, and but you've done an amazing job with, you know, the work up on the hill at the fairgrounds. And it makes me think, you know, so many people are interested in Tunbridge. The history, I mean, there's so many different aspects of your history that you could reach outside of your community, probably, to have people who are very interested in Tunbridge history. And I bet that's true of some of the other historical societies that, you know, somebody may have just a relative. I mean, Tunbridge is, you know, Civil War history. There's, you know, just the fair history alone it's amazing, and people really love it. So I'm not sure I know about the outreach of that. Maybe it's just the people that show interest, but you can cast your net pretty, you know, wider than just the immediate community, I think.
That's a great observation, Tess, because I think a number of museums have found in this virtual era that we've arrived at, not only, you know, their audiences have expanded a lot, but then because they're doing business, like the board meetings are virtual and whatever, it's made that happen so that you can expand that. And I do know that that's happened in some cases. I don't know about in Vermont necessarily, but, you know, the folks that have become more adept at using Zoom for board meetings and conducting, you have to, make sure your bylaws allow for electronic voting and so on and so forth, if you're going to go that route. But it's a great way to expand, the way, the diversity of your board, whether it's racial diversity or age or whatever. The other thing is that, what I've observed is that people do in fact become passionate about two types of people become really passionate about their town's history. And that's old timers that have been there for a million years and their families have been there for generations because it's part of your DNA, so to speak, but also newcomers. And I don't know if this is your experience or not, but newcomers just love to like absorb and, absorb the history of their community because they want to adapt to it quickly. They've staked their, put their stake in the ground in your community, and now I want to be part of this. And you see a lot of that, initial enthusiasm for becoming much more of a participating member of the community with people that are brand new to it. And I don't know whether that's the case with like second homes or whatever, a little bit less so there, but I don't know if that's been your experience, but that certainly is folks that are literally don't have a history with you, but they become now really enthused about the historical society because they're brand new. I know that happens. I see, George, is that true with you? We're getting used to
Started
reading
reading
your
again.
lips, George. Yeah.
Someday we'll get this.
We know what you
Back
said.
up. Maybe my fourth time. I live an hour and a half away from Montpelier. I'm reminded of this by what Tess said. I don't even live in Vermont. I live in Cornish, New Hampshire, and I'm chairman of the Montpelier Historical Society. We're developing a brand new webpage, and we're emphasizing or anything we say talks about people that would be interested in Montpelier history, nothing about being local, but just people who have an interest in Montpelier history. So I would guess I would reinforce that. So as you look for members, board members, or anything else. And I know Sue is active in Tunbridge and lives in Royalton. So there you go.
Yeah. Oh, it's Fern.
Yes, I'd like to share. Thanks, Sue, for bringing up the topic of Tunbridge. I am now the president of the Tunbridge Historical Society. Our president resigned, so I, as vice president, had to step up. So we do have a very small board, but we do meet very actively, and we are starting to recruit local members and a few younger people, which is, as we say, it's always good to see them come out. The more programs that we have and the more programs that we're planning, we expect to get more participation by our local community members. It's important for us to recruit as we can, and perhaps having more programs is the way to go for us, I think, to get more active members, not necessarily board members. Right now it's 3 of us, but we're making it work as best we can.
Mm-hmm.
Thanks.
Thank you, Fern. You and I have not met yet, but we will.
Yeah.
And Izzy, our teacher who teaches high school history, has also been posting on the Tunbridge Historical Society pages about our Tunbridge Fair, which I don't know if any of you realize we're going to celebrate our 150th fair this year.
Wow.
So a lot of work. We didn't get started as early because of COVID as we should have, but and thanks to the other people and everybody putting our heads together, and including the Tunbridge Historical Society members that I know, it'll come off, and we hope all of you will come see us in September.
Mm-hmm.
That's a big draw for us, the Tunbridge Fair. Obviously, thousands of people come to it every year. So that's a big draw to attract people to the Historical Society also.
Do you all still have the, somebody mentioned John Dumphy, and I'm recalling the, what is it, Vermont History Day? Where is that, in Rutland? Wasn't there always a fair that I thought it was John that put it together, but it was like all the historical societies would go to a place. Was that Tunbridge?
It was. So that
It
was
used to be
History
Tunbridge,
Expo.
yeah.
Yeah.
I was the director
Tess
of
knows
the,
that. I was gonna say Tess knows that one well.
I was
Okay,
the director of the Vermont History Expo for 6 years.
that's what it was. That's okay, right. And is that still, I mean, obviously, I'm sure COVID put that off, but are you still
No.
doing that?
No, that ended a while ago,
Huh.
soon after.
I think the last poster I have is like 2010, something like that.
It was 2016 was the last one.
Was it?
Yep.
Okay.
Wow.
2016. Yeah. Yeah. But I think,
That was
you know,
it was June, right? Or
Yep.
something.
Yep.
Yeah.
but I think again, that question, you know, and certainly how COVID has interrupted the in-person aspects of community programming and how you kind of recapture that going forward, I think is one of our big questions for folks and how people interact. I have to say that I do think, again, the ways in which we're approaching things are a little more cyclical, you know, from a standpoint that's actually opened up the calendar. So, you know, we're doing virtual roundtables right now because it's February and it's going to snow 12 inches tomorrow and we don't have to go anywhere to be here. And I don't know if George is not on his lanai in Florida, he must be inside today, but people, you know, board members especially, we have a lot of folks up this way who are snowbirds. So again, like that aspect of being able to meet virtually can really help to expand how there's the pool, George. Thank you. None of us are jealous. How we can expand that ability to interact year round with folks who otherwise wouldn't be able to be on the board or wouldn't be active on the board otherwise, I think is a really interesting thing to consider these days. Right. Stephen.
I'm trying to see if I can make
There you
me
go.
unmute. Okay. We're from Peacham, but one of the things that we have started in the last couple of years, the COVID actually helped. We have a lot of people writing to us about history, wanting to do research and follow up. And we've had new people that come in town that suddenly want to know about the property that they bought. And so that we've been trying to keep them in the loop as much as we can and get them to get our newsletter and stuff. The other thing that we started doing is that when the PTO started putting on events for the kids, we asked if we could participate. And last year, for the first time, we participated in their Halloween parade, and we made our blacksmith shop, spooky blacksmith shop, so that we could hand out candy to them. And a lot of the kids came back when the shop was open for real stuff later because they had never really been inside. And I thought that was pretty good. And the PTO has been very good about reaching out to us. And the elementary school, we did 2 quests in the last couple of years that were outdoor adventure things to find out. We had one that was centered on racism in Vermont. And I can't remember exactly what the first one was now, but we had a lot of participation. We had like 50 or 60 people that did it virtually, or they walked actually to each site. We had like 14 sites, and the cafe in town gave them a little award for participating. And so it's nice that people know who you are. And I like the idea that somebody said, show up at other town meetings and just put your name out there, and people will start asking you for help or want to know if you want to participate in other things that they think history belongs with. So it's been a challenge, though, to get people to be on our board, but we're getting more and more people that will volunteer for one event, like you said.
I think it's important, if you're going to get talented people on your board, that there's something that you want to accomplish in the future. Because somebody can come on, oh, I like Brattleboro, you know, sure, I'll be on your board. But you want to give the person, especially a busy person who could be on all sorts of boards, you want them to feel like they're going to contribute something. And so if you have things you want to be better at that they can help with, or events coming up, or something to do with your collections. But I think you can't ask a talented person to be on your board unless they think they are going to contribute something besides just, oh, I like Brattleboro.
Well, Barbara, that's a great point, and raises the question, how often do we actually do a, I don't want to say a survey, but how often do we ask the question of our board members, why do you do this, and how are you satisfied, and are you being, sort of utilized, maybe is the wrong word, but are you feeling fulfilled doing this? Because a lot of people suffer in silence, and and then they drop off, and you wonder why. Like, why do they just stop showing up or whatever? And sometimes, to Barbara's point, it was like, I expected X when I started. I expected to be utilized in this capacity or whatever, and it didn't pan out. And very often it's for no fault of our own, as the group. It's like we didn't ask the question, what would you like to do, or how can you best fit in, or something. And we often, it's just very casual and informal in some ways, and then we wonder why this didn't work out. And sometimes having that conversation, it's like a family, right? In some ways, you're always just sort of concerned about, all right, how are you fitting into the bigger picture here? And sometimes it's helpful, and sometimes we're embarrassed to ask the questions, or whatever. But I think that's a good point. Are we actually plugging people into the right spots? And sometimes we assume, oh, somebody that's been an accountant all their life, they're going to want to be on our finance committee. They don't want to have anything to do with the finances. They've done that all. They want to putter around with the collections or something, and don't assume that, just because somebody has an expertise in something means that that's really what they want to do with you. They want to use you as kind of their escape from whatever it is. And, asking the question, though, is kind of a good thing to do. Can I ask a question? Oh, we're almost out of time.
Yeah, just about there.
All right. A quick question. Are you all plugged in to the Rev 250 enterprise, the 250th anniversary of the Revolutionary War, which is happening nationally? And I'm sure, Eileen, I didn't ask you, but Vermont Historical must be leading a charge, no pun intended. But I'm calling that out just because I know that, there's sort of this in the places that I've dealt with, there's still kind of a burgeoning effort, like, oh my gosh, look at this. In a few years, we have this opportunity. In 1976, for the bicentennial, we found this great upswell of interest in museums, historical societies, board service of historical societies, and whatever. And I don't know whether we're positioned to take advantage of that, not just the programming and whatever for the general public, but thinking about this as an opportunity to sort of gain traction with some potential audiences. But, it certainly is going to be something that, and already is it's, sort of being phased in over time. So don't miss that as an opportunity.
Yeah.
Thank you, Eileen. Yeah.
Great. Thanks, Danny.
I have one comment. We have sort of come in from an oblique angle onto that celebration. Westminster has the infamous Westminster Massacre, which has its 250th anniversary in 2025. So we are planning on a celebration or an anniversary of that occasion, and we'll work from there into the revolution.
Great.
Sorry.
Yeah, and I think so there is a 250th commission in the state, so there will be some things going on, and I think, again, Alice's point is fantastic for, again, because Vermont has specific history related to the 250th that starts before and after. I know we're kind of extending it probably through the Battle of Bennington and such, and so I think I encourage, all of you to think about what in your communities that might have meant, and the timing of that can certainly move around. But I think that's, again, sort of Dan's point, like, what are the opportunities that are out there at a national level, a state level, a regional level, a community level, whether it's specifically for history or with other aspects of your community, and how you can be a part of that, I think is how we all have to look in the future. And I think Dan, you said something about like the whole sort of clubhouse feel. And I think that's one of the things for historical society to sort of really push back against, and especially when you're thinking about involvement in board retention and recruitment, and getting people being as welcoming as you can be. And how do you create that culture of welcome in your community and as a community organization? And that hopefully will lead you to be able to have more people involved. So yeah, any other questions, comments, last things that somebody needs to get off their chest before we go today? Great. Well, thank you all for joining us. Our last roundtable of the season will be on March 17th. We're going to be talking about new ideas for programming. And so bring your ideas or come to talk about how many more Zooms we can all possibly do in the future, or maybe we'll get to be in person and have some good ideas for that. But thank you all again for coming. And again, recording, you'll get a link to the recording if you registered, and then we'll put that out as well. So you can definitely share it with anyone else.
Thank you very much.
Thanks, everybody.
Yeah.